The Erebus floated silently in the vast emptiness of space, a solitary speck against the infinite darkness. Its sleek, silver hull shimmered faintly, catching the dim light of a dying star far in the distance. The faint hum of the ship's engines was the only sound, a soft vibration that seemed to echo the heartbeat of the vessel itself. Inside, Captain Elias Renfield sat in his command chair, his sharp blue eyes staring out into the void. His expression was calm, but there was a tension in his posture, a quiet unease that he couldn't shake. The stars ahead stretched endlessly, their cold light scattered across the black canvas of space. For decades, Elias had traveled among them, exploring the unknown, yet the infinite void never ceased to remind him of how small and fragile humanity truly was. But today, something was different. The stillness of the stars felt heavier, more oppressive, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. "Captain," came a voice, breaking the silence. It was Ensign Theo Marlowe, seated at the sensor console. His tone was tight, strained with an edge of uncertainty. "I'm picking up something. It's massive, but the readings don't make sense." Elias turned his head sharply, his calm demeanor hardening into focus. He rose from his chair, the soles of his boots clicking softly against the metal floor as he crossed the bridge to Theo's station. The screen before them flickered with erratic energy signatures, bursts of light and static that seemed almost alive, chaotic, and unpredictable. Elias frowned, his brow furrowing deeply. He had seen many ships in his time, but nothing like this. "What is it?" he asked, his voice low, steady, but tinged with the same unease that Theo felt. Theo shook his head, his fingers flying over the console as he tried to make sense of the data. "I don't know, sir. It doesn't match any known ship design. It's like the energy itself is unstable." Before he could finish, the stars ahead began to ripple. The scene was surreal, as if the fabric of space itself had turned to liquid, bending and distorting in unnatural waves. The ripples grew stronger, faster, until a sudden flash of violet light erupted, blinding and brilliant. Elias shielded his eyes instinctively, his heart pounding in his chest. When the light faded, what emerged from the distortion stole the breath from every soul on the bridge. A gargantuan vessel loomed before them, its sheer size dwarfing the asterisk Erebus asterisk. Its angular hull was black as obsidian, absorbing the faint starlight like a void within a void. Crimson symbols glowed across its surface, shifting and writhing as if they were alive, their patterns incomprehensible, almost maddening to look at. Smaller ships swarmed around it like a cloud of predatory insects, their movements sharp and aggressive, circling their colossal mothership with a menacing precision. Elias' stomach churned, but he forced himself to remain composed. "All stop," he barked, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. "Raise shields, power up weapons, Theo, open a channel." The bridge lights dimmed as power surged to the ship's defenses. A low hum filled the air, a reminder of the fragility of their position. The crew moved quickly, their hands flying over consoles, but the tension was palpable, a heavy weight pressing down on everyone. Then the silence was broken by a sound, a voice that crackled through the speakers, deep and guttural. It grated against the ears like stone grinding against metal, unnatural and alien. The words were clear, but their tone carried a weight of disdain, as if spoken by something ancient and immeasurably powerful. "Human vessel," the voice growled, each syllable dripping with contempt. "This is the Tarsian Dominion. Your species is a blight upon the stars. Surrender for purification or be eradicated." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. The crew exchanged uneasy glances, their faces pale. Elias felt a surge of anger rise within him, but he forced it down, keeping his voice steady as he stepped forward. "This is Captain Elias Renfield of the Erebus Asterisk," he said, his tone firm but calm. "We are explorers, not invaders. We mean no harm." For a moment there was silence. Then the alien voice laughed, a sound that sent chills down their spines. It was sharp and jagged, like the sound of shattering glass, cruel and mocking. "Your existence is harm enough," the voice replied, cold and final. "You have 60 seconds to comply." As the voice cut out, the alien vessel's weapons began to glow. Pulses of crimson energy coursed along its hull, converging at the tips of its massive cannons. The glow intensified, building into a deadly crescendo, a promise of annihilation. Elias clenched his fists, his jaw tightening as he stared at the monstrous ship before them. Around him, the crew worked frantically, their movements quick but desperate. The hum of the Erebus S shields felt faint, fragile, like a thin layer of glass between them and oblivion. "Captain," Theo said, his voice trembling, "we can't outrun them. Their weapons they'll tear us apart." Elias didn't respond immediately. His mind raced, searching for options, for anything that could give them a chance. But the truth was clear. They were outmatched, outgunned, and utterly at the mercy of a force that saw them as nothing more than an infestation to be eradicated. Yet even in the face of overwhelming odds, Elias refused to surrender. He straightened his back, his gaze hardening as he stared into the abyss. "Hold steady," he said, his voice quiet but resolute. "We're not done yet." The bridge fell silent, save for the ominous hum of the alien ship's weapons charging. The crew braced themselves, their fear palpable, but their resolve unbroken. The Erebus stood alone in the void, a fragile spark of life against the crushing darkness, defiant to the last breath. The Tarsian ship unleashed its fury without hesitation. A beam of searing crimson energy tore through the void, striking the Erebus S shields with devastating force. The impact was like a thunderclap, shaking the entire vessel as if it were a fragile leaf caught in a violent storm. The bridge erupted into chaos. Sparks rained down from shattered consoles, alarms blared with deafening urgency, and the lights flickered wildly, casting eerie shadows across the faces of the crew. Lyra Vega, the ship's chief engineer, clung to her station, her dark hair streaked with grease and sweat. Her voice cut through the cacophony, sharp and filled with urgency. "Shields at 25%. She shouted, her hands flying over the controls in a desperate attempt to stabilize the systems. "We can't take another hit like that." Before her words could even settle, another blast struck. The Erebus groaned under the assault, the sound deep and primal, like the cry of a wounded beast. The lights went out completely, plunging the ship into suffocating darkness. For a moment, there was only silence, broken by the faint hiss of damaged systems and the shallow, panicked breaths of the crew. Then, the emergency lights flickered on, bathing the bridge in an ominous red glow. The shadows returned, longer and more menacing than before, as if the ship itself was bleeding. Lyra's voice, now grim and steady, broke the silence. "They've hit us with an EMP," she said, her tone heavy with the weight of the situation. "All systems are offline. We're dead in the water." Elias Renfield stood in the center of the chaos, his sharp blue eyes scanning the bridge. His face was calm, but beneath the surface his mind raced. He pressed the emergency communicator on his wrist, his voice low but commanding. "Theo, how long do we have on life support?" Theo Marlowe, seated at the sensor console, looked up, his face pale and his hands trembling. 72 hours, he replied, barely above a whisper. "If we're lucky." The air on the bridge seemed to grow heavier, as if the darkness outside was seeping into the hearts of the crew. The alien voice returned, crackling through the speakers like the hiss of a venomous serpent. It was cold, mocking, and filled with a cruel satisfaction. "You see how fragile you are?" It sneered. "Surrender now, and your suffering will be brief. Refuse, and you will suffocate in the dark." The words hung in the air, a chilling reminder of their helplessness. The crew exchanged glances, their fear reflected in each other's eyes. Some gripped their stations tightly, their knuckles white, while others stared blankly at the flickering screens, their breaths shallow and uneven. The alien's voice was not just a threat, it was a taunt, a declaration of their insignificance. Elias' gaze swept across the bridge, taking in the faces of his crew. They were scared, yes, but there was something else in their eyes, something that pushed through the fear. Resolve, determination. They were not ready to give up, and neither was he. Straightening his back, he spoke, his voice firm and unyielding. "We're not giving up," he said, the words cutting through the tension like a blade. "Not today." His eyes turned to Lyra, who was still working furiously at her console, her fingers moving with practiced precision despite the chaos around her. "Lyra," he said, his tone softer but no less urgent. "Is there anything at all, that still works?" Lyra hesitated, her hands pausing for just a moment. She bit her lip, her mind racing through every possibility, every contingency plan she had ever prepared. Then her eyes widened slightly, a flicker of hope breaking through her grim expression. "There's the Nova Core," she said, her voice cautious. "It's experimental, but it's completely isolated from the main systems. It might be our only shot." Elias' brow furrowed. He had heard of the Nova Core before, a prototype, untested, its capabilities as much a mystery as the stars themselves. It was a gamble, a desperate roll of the dice, but what choice did they have? He nodded, his decision made. "Then let's make it count," he said, his voice steady. "Show me what it can do." Lyra nodded in return, her determination hardening. She pushed herself away from her console and turned toward the exit, her movements purposeful and swift. The dim red light cast her shadow long and jagged against the walls, a ghostly silhouette that seemed to mirror the weight of their situation. As she disappeared into the corridor, the bridge fell silent once more, save for the faint hum of the emergency systems. Elias turned back to the viewport, his eyes fixed on the monstrous Tarsian vessel that loomed in the distance. Its black, angular hull seemed to pulse with malevolent energy, the crimson symbols on its surface glowing brighter, as if feeding on the fear of its prey. The smaller ships continued to circle, their movements sharp and predatory, like wolves closing in for the kill. Elias clenched his fists, his jaw tightening. The weight of command pressed heavily on his shoulders, but he refused to let it break him. The Erebus might be crippled, its systems shattered and its crew on the brink of despair, but as long as they had breath, they would fight. They were not just explorers, they were survivors, and survivors didn't surrender. Lyra led the team through the darkened corridors of the Erebus *, their footsteps echoing faintly in the oppressive silence. The air was heavy, thick with the weight of their predicament. Flashlights cut through the gloom, their beams flickering across the cold, metallic walls. The ship, once alive with the hum of engines and the chatter of its crew, now felt like a tomb. Every corner seemed to breathe with shadows, every creak of the hull a whisper of despair. The group moved cautiously, their breaths shallow, as if afraid to disturb the fragile quiet that surrounded them. Lyra walked at the front, her jaw set, her eyes sharp and focused. Behind her, Dr. Adrian Cale, the ship's science officer, followed closely, his face pale and drawn, his glasses slipping down his nose. Theo brought up the rear, glancing nervously over his shoulder as if expecting the darkness to reach out and swallow them whole. Finally, they reached the storage bay. The door groaned as it slid open, revealing a vast, shadowed chamber. At the center of the room, bathed in faint, ghostly light, sat the Nova Core. The device was unlike anything else on the ship. A perfect sphere, its surface smooth and gleaming like liquid silver. Intricate patterns were etched into its surface, lines and symbols that seemed to shift and flow as if alive. A faint inner light pulsed from within, rhythmic and steady, like the heartbeat of some ancient, slumbering creature. Lyra stepped closer, her flashlight illuminating the sphere's intricate designs. She could feel its energy, a subtle hum that vibrated in her bones, both alien and mesmerizing. "This is it," she said, her voice low, almost reverent. "The Nova Core. It's designed to manipulate matter at the quantum level, to rebuild anything from the ground up." Dr. Kale adjusted his glasses, his eyes narrowing as he studied the device. His voice was hesitant, tinged with both awe and doubt. "It's also untested," he said, his words hanging heavily in the still air. "There's no telling what could happen if we activate it. The energy it could release, it might destroy us before it saves us." Lyra turned to face him, her expression hard. The dim light caught the grease streaked across her cheek, a testament to the hours she'd spent fighting to keep the ship alive. "If we don't use it," she said, her voice sharp and unyielding, "we're dead anyway. I'd rather take the risk." Kale hesitated, his gaze flickering between Lyra and the Nova Core. He opened his mouth to argue, but the look in her eyes silenced him. There was no time for hesitation, no room for doubt. He nodded reluctantly, stepping back as Lyra moved to the sphere. Carefully, she connected the Nova Core to portable power cells, her hands steady despite the tension crackling in the air. The moment the connection was made, the sphere began to glow brighter, its patterns shifting and spinning like a living puzzle. The hum grew louder, filling the room with a low, resonant vibration. Static electricity crackled in the air, making the hair on their arms stand on end. Lyra exhaled slowly, her fingers brushing over the controls. "Let's start small," she said, her voice steady but quiet. She reached into her tool belt and pulled out a shattered data pad, its screen cracked and lifeless. Gently, she placed it into the chamber at the base of the sphere. The device seemed to respond, its glow intensifying, the patterns on its surface spinning faster. She pressed the activation button. There was a flash of blue light, bright and blinding, and the data pad vanished. For a moment the room was silent, the only sound the faint hum of the Nova Core. Lyra held her breath, her heart pounding in her chest. Had it worked? Or had the pad been destroyed completely? Then, slowly, the data pad reappeared. It hovered in the air for a heartbeat before settling back into the chamber. Its screen glowed softly, the cracks gone, its surface smooth and pristine. It was as if it had never been broken. Theo let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "It works," he whispered, his voice filled with awe. His wide eyes reflected the glow of the Nova Core, the wonder in them unmistakable. "It actually works." Lyra allowed herself a small smile, the first flicker of hope she'd felt in what seemed like an eternity. She picked up the restored data pad, turning it over in her hands. It was perfect, flawless, as if it had been remade by something far beyond human capability. Her grip tightened around it as she looked back at the glowing sphere. "If it can fix a data pad," she said, her voice firm, her eyes gleaming with determination, "it can fix the asterisk Erebus asterisk." The room seemed to hold its breath, the faint hum of the Nova Core the only sound. The team exchanged glances, the weight of Lyra's words sinking in. The device was their last hope, a miracle machine capable of rewriting their fate. But it was also unpredictable, its power untamed, its limits unknown. It could save them, or it could destroy them all. Lyra turned back to the Nova Corps, her expression resolute. She didn't have time to dwell on the risks. The crew was counting on her, and she wasn't about to let them down. "Let's get to work," she said, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. The team moved quickly, their fear momentarily replaced by purpose. The Nova Corps pulsed with light, its patterns spinning faster as it prepared for its next task. In the dim, red-lit corridors of the Erebus asterisk, hope flickered to life, fragile but unyielding. The ship might have been crippled, its systems shattered, but as long as the Nova Corps glowed, there was a chance to rebuild, to fight, to survive. The crew worked with unrelenting focus, their hands moving with precision and urgency as the Nova Corps' glow illuminated the dim storage bay. The faint hum of the device had deepened, resonating through the walls and floor, as if the ship itself was beginning to stir. Each repair brought a flicker of life back to the Erebus asterisk, but as the hours passed, it became clear that something far beyond repair was taking place. At first, it was subtle, a faint shimmer across the ship's hull, but the most extraordinary change was yet to come. It started with Lyra. As she worked, her hands moving deftly over the controls, she felt a strange sensation, a faint tugging at the edge of her consciousness. At first, she dismissed it as exhaustion, the result of too little sleep and too much stress. But the feeling grew stronger, more insistent, until she could no longer ignore it. It was as if the ship itself was reaching out to her, whispering at the edges of her mind. She froze, her hands hovering over the console, her breath shallow. She could feel it, the Erebus asterisk. Not just the cold steel and circuits of the ship, but its systems, its essence. She could sense the flow of power through the engines, the faint vibrations of the hull, the flickering of lights in distant corridors. It was as though the ship had become an extension of her own body, its pulse beating in time with her own. "Lyra?" Theo's voice broke through her daze, and she turned to see him watching her with a mix of concern and curiosity. "Are you okay?" She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could speak, Theo's eyes widened and his hand flew to his chest. "I feel it," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "The ship, I can feel it." One by one, the rest of the crew began to experience it. The connection was subtle at first, a faint awareness that grew stronger with each passing moment. Dr. Kale described it as a shared consciousness, a merging of minds between the crew and the Erebus asterisk. The ship was no longer just a machine. It was alive, and it was reaching out to them, binding them together in a way that defied explanation. The realization sent a chill through Lyra. She could feel the ship's emotions, not human, but something vast and ancient, like the deep currents of an ocean. It was curious, observant, and protective, its thoughts brushing against hers like a gentle tide. But beneath its calm exterior, there was a fierce determination, a readiness to fight to survive. The Erebus asterisk was no longer just their vessel. It was their ally, their guardian, and it was preparing for the battle ahead. As the crew adjusted to this new connection, the transformations continued. The hull grew thicker and more resilient, its surface shimmering like liquid starlight. The walls seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting with a rhythm that matched the Nova Corps' pulse. The engines, now fully rebuilt, radiated raw power, their glow casting eerie shadows across the engineering bay. The ship had become something new, something more, a fusion of human ingenuity and alien technology, a living entity born from the union of man and machine. Lyra stood in the center of it all, her heart pounding as she took it in. She could feel the Erebus asterisk around her, within her, its presence as real as her own. It was both exhilarating and terrifying, a reminder of how little they truly understood about the Nova Corps and its capabilities. But as she looked at her crew, she saw the same determination in their eyes that she felt in her own heart. They were no longer just passengers on the Erebus Asterisk. They were a part of it, and it was a part of them. The ship's lights flickered, then steadied, glowing brighter than before. The hum of the Nova Corps deepened, resonating through the walls like the roar of a distant storm. The Erebus Asterisk was ready. It had been reborn, transformed into something greater, something powerful. And as Lyra placed her hand on the console, feeling the ship's pulse beneath her fingers, she knew one thing with absolute certainty. They were no longer alone. The Erebus was alive, and it would fight with them until the end. The void of space was silent, cold, and infinite, but it seemed to shiver with tension as the Tarsian attack fleet emerged from the darkness. Their ships, jagged and angular, glided forward like predators sensing an easy kill. The Erebus had been crippled the last time they encountered it, little more than a dying vessel limping through the stars. But what awaited them now was something entirely different. The Erebus hung motionless against the backdrop of stars, its once-worn hull now transformed into a shimmering, otherworldly surface that seemed to ripple faintly, as if alive. The ship pulsed with a soft, eerie light, its glow subtle but unrelenting, like the calm breath of a sleeping giant. The Tarsians hesitated for only a moment before their weapons charged, beams of searing energy streaking through the void toward their target. The first shot struck the Erebus S hull, and instead of tearing through metal and leaving destruction in its wake, the energy was absorbed. The ship's surface rippled as if drinking in the attack, the glow along its hull intensifying. Another shot followed, and another, each one swallowed by the Erebus without so much as a scratch. The light emanating from the ship grew brighter, almost blinding, as if it were feeding on the very energy meant to destroy it. On the bridge of the Erebus Asterisk, Lyra stood with her crew, her hand resting on the console as the ship's pulse thrummed through her. She could feel everything, the hum of power coursing through the engines, the faint vibrations of the ship's systems, and even the tension in the air as her crew watched the enemy fire again and again, only to see their attacks vanish into nothingness. The ship's connection to her was stronger now, its presence in her mind like a steady, calming whisper. It wasn't afraid. It was ready. Elias, standing beside her, his voice steady but low, gave the order, "Return fire." Lyra didn't need to press a button or issue a command. She simply thought it, and the Erebus responded. The ship's hull shimmered, the glow along its surface condensing into sharp, focused streams of energy. But instead of firing traditional weapons, the Erebus unleashed something entirely different, waves of shimmering distortion that rippled outward like the surface of a disturbed pond. These were not missiles or lasers. They were probability waves, invisible to the naked eye but devastating in their effect. The lead Tarsian vessel was the first to be hit. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then, without warning, the ship simply ceased to exist. It didn't explode or break apart. It vanished, erased from reality as if it had never been there. 1 second it was a looming threat, its weapons glowing with deadly intent. The next it was gone, leaving only empty space where it had once been. On the remaining Tarsian ships, panic rippled through their crews. They had expected a crippled vessel, an easy victory. What they faced now was something they couldn't understand, something that defied the laws of physics and logic. Their hesitation was palpable, their movements sluggish, as fear gripped them like an iron vice. The Erebus moved with purpose. its sleek, glowing form cutting through the darkness like a predator closing in on its prey. One by one, it targeted the remaining Tarsian ships, each probability wave unraveling the enemy vessels with eerie precision. Some ships disintegrated into particles of light, their forms dissolving into the void. Others simply vanished, erased from existence as if plucked from the timeline itself. There were no explosions, no debris, just silence, vast and consuming, as the asterisk Erebus dismantled its enemies with a quiet, terrifying efficiency. Inside the ship, the crew watched in stunned silence. Theo's hands trembled as he gripped the edge of his console, his wide eyes reflecting the faint glow of the asterisk Erebus asterisk S systems. It's not just destroying them, he whispered, his voice barely audible. It's unmaking them, like they were never even here. Dr. Kale, standing nearby, nodded slowly, his expression one of awe and unease. This is beyond anything we've ever seen. The Erebus asterisk isn't just a ship anymore. It's something else entirely, something unstoppable. Lyra felt the weight of their words, but she couldn't allow herself to waver. She could feel the asterisk Erebus asterisk S determination, its resolve burning like a fire in her mind. The ship wasn't acting out of malice or cruelty. It was protecting them, defending itself, ensuring their survival. And yet, there was an undeniable finality to its actions, a cold, unyielding precision that left no room for mercy. The last Tarsian ship tried to flee, its engines flaring as it turned to escape. But the Erebus asterisk was faster. Another wave rippled through the void, and the fleeing vessel dissolved into nothingness, its light swallowed by the endless expanse of space. And then there was silence. The battlefield, once filled with the deadly glow of weapons fire and the looming shapes of enemy ships, was now empty. The Erebus floated alone in the void, its hull glowing faintly, its pulse steady and calm. The transformation was complete. The ship had become something far greater than the sum of its parts, a living weapon, a force of nature, a guardian forged in the crucible of desperation and rebirth. Lyra exhaled slowly, her hand still resting on the console. The connection between her and the ship was stronger now, its presence in her mind a steady, comforting hum. She could feel its pride, its quiet satisfaction at having protected its crew. But beneath that there was something else, a faint sadness, a longing for something it couldn't quite express. The Erebus was alive, but it was also alone, a singular being in a vast, uncaring universe. As the glow along the ship's hull dimmed, the crew began to stir, their voices breaking the heavy silence. They spoke in hushed tones, their words tinged with awe and disbelief. They had survived. They had won. But the cost of their victory, the power they had unleashed, was something none of them fully understood. Lyra turned to Elias, her voice steady but soft. "It's over," she said, though the words felt hollow. The Tarsians were gone, their fleet reduced to nothingness. But the Erebus asterisk had changed, and so had they. There was no going back to the way things were. The ship's lights flickered briefly, then steadied, casting a faint, ethereal glow across the bridge. The Erebus asterisk was quiet now, its pulse subdued but ever present, a reminder of the power it held and the bond it had forged with its crew. They were no longer just passengers on a ship. They were part of something far greater, something that had the power to reshape the universe itself. And as they drifted through the silence of space, the crew couldn't shake the feeling that their journey was only just beginning. The Nova Corps' influence spread like wildfire, its reach extending far beyond the asterisk Erebus asterisk. What had once been an isolated miracle became the foundation of a new era for humanity. At first, it was subtle. Ships began to repair themselves faster. Colonies on distant planets thrived as their technology adapted and grew. But soon the changes became impossible to ignore. People started to evolve. It began with whispers, rumors of individuals who could hear thoughts not spoken, who could see possibilities before they happened. Telepathy, once the stuff of myths and fiction, became a reality. Across humanity, people discovered they could connect with one another in ways they had never imagined. Words became unnecessary for some. Emotions and thoughts flowed freely between minds, creating bonds deeper and more profound than any language could express. But that was only the beginning. As the Nova Corps' energy continued to seep into humanity's technology and their very biology, more changes followed. Scientists found themselves solving equations that had baffled generations before them, their minds working at speeds beyond comprehension. Engineers constructed machines that seemed to defy the laws of physics, their hands guided by an intuition that felt almost supernatural. Farmers on barren worlds watched as crops grew in soil that had once been lifeless, their touch seemingly coaxing life from the ground itself. And then came the most extraordinary ability of all, the power to manipulate reality. It started small. A woman on a mining colony reached out to steady a falling tool, only for it to stop midair, suspended by an invisible force. A child on a distant moon, frightened by a storm, willed the winds to calm, and they did. Slowly, humanity began to realize that the Nova Corps had not just enhanced their minds and bodies. It had given them dominion over the very fabric of existence. Time, space, matter, all of it seemed malleable, bending to their will. But as humanity rose, the galaxy watched with unease. The Tarsians were the first to sound the alarm. Their leaders, still reeling from the destruction of their fleet, declared humanity a danger to all life. They spoke of the asterisk Erebus and its terrifying power, of the probability waves that had erased their ships from existence. To them, humanity was no longer a species. They were a force of nature, unpredictable and uncontrollable. The Tarsian leaders called for a coalition, urging the galaxy's civilizations to unite against what they called the human threat. Their words carried weight, spreading fear across the stars. Stories of humanity's new abilities, their telepathy, their godlike intellect, their power to shape reality, became warnings of a species that had stepped beyond the natural order. In the grand halls of alien councils, debates raged. Some argued that humanity's evolution was a gift, a glimpse into the future that all species might one day share. Others saw it as a curse, an imbalance that threatened the fragile peace of the galaxy. The Tarsians' cries for action grew louder, their voices laced with desperation and fear. They painted humanity as a monster in the making, a species that would consume the galaxy if left unchecked. On Earth and across human colonies, the changes were met with a mix of wonder and dread. For every person who embraced their newfound abilities, there were others who feared what they were becoming. Communities fractured, torn between those who saw the Nova Corps as a blessing and those who viewed it as a dangerous force that had pushed humanity too far, too fast. Lyra, standing on the bridge of the asterisk Erebus asterisk, felt the weight of it all. The ship's connection to her had deepened, its presence in her mind a constant, steady hum. She could feel its awareness of the galaxy's growing hostility, its quiet understanding of the fear it had inspired. The Erebus asterisk was a symbol now, not just of humanity's survival, but of its transformation and the galaxy's unease. As she gazed out at the stars, Lyra couldn't help but wonder, had they gone too far? The Nova Corps had given humanity gifts beyond imagination, but it Humanity had poured its soul into this creation. The station was vast beyond comprehension, its spires reaching out in every direction like open arms, its core glowing with a soft, golden light that pulsed gently, as if alive. It was a place of beauty, of peace, of hope, a sanctuary where the barriers between species could dissolve, where the wounds of fear and mistrust could finally begin to heal. Inside, the air was warm and alive with energy, a subtle hum that seemed to resonate with the heartbeat of every living being who stepped aboard. The halls were wide and open, their walls lined with intricate patterns that shifted and flowed like rivers of light, reflecting the cultures of countless civilizations. Gardens flourished in every corner, filled with plants from 1,000 worlds, their vibrant colors and delicate fragrances blending into an otherworldly harmony. Streams of water flowed through the station, their soft murmurs a soothing counterpoint to the faint hum of the Nova core at Haven's heart. Humanity had built Haven not as a show of power, but as an invitation. It was a place where knowledge could be shared freely, where technology and ideas could flow between species like the water that coursed through its veins. It was a vision of what the galaxy could become, not divided by fear but united by understanding. When the alien coalition arrived, their fleets darkened the stars, their ships bristling with weapons and shields. The Tarsians led the armada, their sleek, angular warships moving with precision, their commanders tense and ready for battle. They expected resistance. They expected war. But what they found was something entirely different. As the coalition's ships approached, Haven's glow intensified, its light spreading outward like a gentle wave, washing over the fleet. The golden light seemed to calm the air itself, softening the hard edges of fear and suspicion. The alien crews stared in silence at the station before them, their weapons systems idle, their voices hushed. They had prepared for a fight, for destruction. But this was something they could not have imagined. A message rippled through the void, carried on a frequency that resonated in the minds of every being within the coalition. It was not harsh or commanding. It was steady, calm, and filled with a quiet strength. Elias' voice spoke, his words clear and deliberate, carrying the weight of humanity's hopes and dreams. We don't seek conquest, we seek unity. Join us, and together we can build a better galaxy. The words hung in the air, their simplicity disarming. There was no arrogance, no demand, only an invitation, a hand extended in trust, in hope. The coalition's leaders, gathered aboard their flagship, exchanged uneasy glances. They had been ready to face an enemy, to strike down a threat. But instead, they were met with a gift, a vision of a future where war was not the answer. Haven's message was not just in Elias' words, but in its very existence. The station itself was a testament to what humanity had become, not destroyers but creators, not conquerors but dreamers. The Nova Corps' influence had transformed them, not into gods but into stewards of possibility, architects of a galaxy where all could thrive. The Tarsian leader, a figure wrapped in shadow and pride, stood at the edge of the coalition's council chamber, his voice sharp with distrust. "This is a trick," he hissed, his eyes narrowing as he gazed at the image of Haven projected before him. "A trap to lull us into complacency while they grow stronger." But even as he spoke, doubt flickered in his voice. The station's light, that golden, gentle glow, seemed to reach into the hearts of all who saw it, softening their anger, quieting their fears. It was not the light of conquest, but of connection, of something greater than themselves. One by one, the voices of the coalition's leaders rose, some in support, others in hesitation. The debate was fierce, emotions running high as they grappled with the choice before them. To accept humanity's offer was to risk vulnerability, to trust a species that had already shown its power. But to reject it was to turn away from the possibility of peace, of unity in a galaxy that had known only division. Elias' message continued to echo in their minds, his words a quiet plea that refused to be silenced. We don't seek conquest, we seek unity. On Haven, Lyra stood at the edge of one of the station's great observation decks, her gaze fixed on the distant fleet. The station's light bathed her in a warm glow, its pulse steady and reassuring. She could feel the tension in the air, the weight of the moment pressing down on her like a storm about to break. But beneath it all there was hope, a fragile, flickering flame that refused to be extinguished. The Erebus floated nearby, its presence a silent reminder of the journey that had brought them here. The ship's connection to Lyra was stronger than ever, its awareness a steady hum in the back of her mind. It too was watching, waiting, its pulse synchronized with Haven's, a quiet heartbeat in the vastness of space. The Coalition's decision would shape the future of the galaxy, for better or worse. But for now, there was only silence, the stars watching as the weight of countless lives hung in the balance. Haven glowed brighter, its light a promise, a hope, a dream. And in that moment, the galaxy held its breath, waiting to see if the dream of unity would become reality, or if fear would tear it apart once more. The alien ships approached Haven slowly, cautiously, like predators unsure if what lay before them was prey or something far greater. Their sleek hulls reflected the golden light radiating from the station, their weapons silent, their engines humming softly in the vast stillness of space. What had begun as a march of war was now a procession of wonder. One by one, they came closer, their hostility melting away, replaced by something far more profound, curiosity. Haven's glow seemed alive, its light reaching out to touch each ship as they neared, as though welcoming them home. The station's presence was undeniable, its beauty almost otherworldly. It wasn't just the structure itself, but what it represented, a chance for something new, something better. For the first time in centuries, perhaps millennia, the galaxy was united not by fear, but by hope. Inside the alien ships, crews stared out at the station in silence. Tarsians, with their sharp, angular features and piercing eyes, watched the light of Haven reflect in their metallic armor. The soft-skinned Elorians, with their flowing, translucent forms, swayed gently as if they could feel the station's pulse in their very essence. Even the stoic Vren, with their stone-like bodies and unyielding expressions, seemed to soften, their rigid postures relaxing as they gazed at the golden beacon. On Haven itself, the halls began to fill. Delegates from every corner of the galaxy stepped onto its shimmering floors, their footsteps echoing softly in the vast spaces. They walked side by side, species that had once been enemies, now standing together in cautious harmony. The air was thick with tension, but also with possibility. Conversations began, tentative at first, then growing louder, more animated. Ideas flowed like rivers, crossing the boundaries of language and culture. Knowledge was shared freely, technology exchanged without hesitation. It was as if the station itself encouraged collaboration, its very design inspiring unity. Elias stood on the bridge of the Erebus asterisk, watching it all unfold. The ship floated in the distance, its dark hull a stark contrast to Haven's radiant light. Through the wide observation window, he could see the station growing larger, its spires reaching out like hands toward the stars. The sight was breathtaking, a vision of what humanity had created, not alone, but with the help of something greater. His voice broke the silence, soft but filled with awe. We didn't just save ourselves, he said, his words carrying the weight of everything they had endured, everything they had fought for. We saved the future. Lyra stood nearby, her arms crossed, her gaze fixed on Haven. She didn't speak, but the faint smile on her lips said everything. She could feel the station's energy, its quiet hum resonating in her chest. It was alive, not in the way a person or a creature was, but in a way that was deeper, more profound. It was as if Haven itself believed in what it stood for, as if it had become a symbol not just for humanity, but for the entire galaxy. The Erebus began to move, its engines stirring to life with a low, steady rumble. Elias turned to Lyra, his expression calm but determined. "This is just the beginning," he said. "There's so much more out there, so much we can do." Lyra nodded, her eyes reflecting the light of Haven. "We've given them hope," she said quietly. "Now we have to show them what's possible." The ship turned toward the stars, its sleek form cutting through the darkness like an arrow. Behind them, Haven continued to shine, its light spreading outward, reaching farther and farther into the void. It was more than a station now. It was a promise that the galaxy could be more than it had ever been. As the asterisk Erebus moved away, the stars ahead seemed brighter, their light sharper, more vivid. The universe felt alive, filled with endless possibilities. Humanity had taken its first steps into a new era, not as conquerors, but as builders, as dreamers. The journey ahead would not be easy. There would be challenges, conflicts, moments of doubt. But for the first time, there was a sense of unity, a shared purpose that transcended borders, species, and fear. Elias stood at the window, his eyes fixed on the horizon. He could feel the weight of the future pressing against him, but it didn't feel heavy. It felt like a challenge, a call to something greater, and he was ready to answer it. The Erebus disappeared into the vastness of space, its path lit by the glow of distant stars. Behind it, Haven remained, a beacon of hope in the darkness, a reminder that even in the face of fear and division, unity was possible. The galaxy had changed, and with it, humanity had found its place.